Hello, welcome back to the Anchored in Truth podcast. We have a lot to cover in this deep dive, so let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of sources today that they read less like dry legal filings and more like the first draft of some kind of geopolitical thriller.
They really do.
So our mission is to deep dive into the legal and political firestorm around Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. We're looking specifically at the charges and just the incredibly dramatic actions taken in the U.S.
And this is a truly exceptional situation to be analyzing. We're talking about a sitting head of state.
Right.
An internationally recognized leader, controversial for sure, but still he's facing criminal prosecution in a foreign country. In New York, of all places.
Yeah.
The fact that the U.S. is actively pursuing this indictment against a leader who is still in power, it immediately raises these huge questions about sovereignty, international law,
And the immediate hook, the thing that just kicked this whole crisis into another gear, is what happened in that New York court. Our sources say Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro entered a formal not guilty plea to a whole slew of pretty serious weapons and drug charges. This just moves the whole conflict out of the world of diplomatic talk and squarely into the U.S. criminal justice system.
It absolutely does. It creates this fascinating kind of paradoxical situation. For the United States, this is just a formal legal process.
Right, business as usual in a way.
But for the rest of the world, it's a massive escalation of a long, long-running international conflict.
Which leads us right to the core legal question. I mean, what exactly is the United States alleging here? And maybe more importantly, what legal mechanism lets the U.S. charge a sitting foreign head of state in the first place? Let's zero in on those charges.
Okay, so the sources, they outline this indictment it's incredibly severe and it's got a lot of layers to it. And it's not just him, by the way, it also includes his wife.
Wow. Okay.
The legal weight here is immense, and the charges basically fall into three major categories. The first one, and it's the most potent politically, is narco terrorism conspiracy.
Narco terrorism.
Yep. The second is a huge cocaine importation conspiracy. And the third covers a bunch of specific weapons offenses.
Narco terrorism. That's a profoundly specific term. Why would prosecutors go with that charge, instead of just drug trafficking? Does that label change the legal calculus for the defense?
It changes everything. It's the whole ball game. This is where you can really see the legal strategy.
That's tough.
If you charge a foreign leader with simple drug trafficking, they might be able to claim sovereign immunity. That's the legal principle that, protects a state and its leader from a foreign court.
The get out of jail free card, diplomatically speaking.
Sort of. But by charging Maduro with narco terrorism, the prosecution is essentially framing him not as a protected head of state doing his job, but as a criminal actor.
Oh.
Someone engaged in state-sponsored terrorism, using trafficking to harm the U.S. This criminal label, it's specifically designed to cut right through that shield of diplomatic immunity.
Okay, that makes the why of the charge crystal clear. But what about jurisdiction? I mean, these alleged crimes, the conspiracy, the trafficking, they didn't happen inside the U.S.
Right.
So how does the U.S. assert jurisdiction over a sitting foreign president for things that happened in Venezuela? What gives a court in the Eastern District of New York the right to even hear this case?
Well, the jurisdiction really hinges on the nature of the conspiracy charge itself. U.S. law, especially when it comes to drugs and terrorism, uses what's called broad extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Meaning it reaches outside your own borders.
Exactly. The prosecutors don't have to prove the entire crime happened on U.S. soil. They just have to prove that the conspiracy was intended to impact the U.S. or actually did.
So the target was the U.S.
That's the argument. Because the indictment alleges this long-running scheme to flood the U.S. with cocaine and then use the profits for terrorism, U.S. prosecutors can say the illegal activity was directed at the U.S., and boom. That's what gives the court in New York its jurisdiction.
That context is it's vital.
Yeah.
So after he enters the not guilty plea for all this, narco terrorism, cocaine, weapons, what happens next? Where did they send him?
The sources confirm the immediate outcome. After the plea, Maduro was detained and sent back to a facility in Brooklyn, a Brooklyn jail.
A Brooklyn jail.
Yeah.
The choice of location is pretty striking. Is there any specific legal or diplomatic significance to putting him in a general jail, as opposed to, say, a specialized holding location?
I think the location, while it's often used for these big cases in the Eastern District of New York, is certainly symbolic.
How so?
By putting him in a standard jail, the U.S. is sending a very clear signal.
That he's just another defendant.
Exactly. It says, we view Maduro purely as a criminal defendant, not as a captured head of state who deserves special treatment or diplomatic protection. It just underlines their whole legal position, that his claims to sovereignty and immunity are, well, gone.
So on one side, you have this meticulous, formal legal process playing out. You've got a detailed indictment, specific charges to get around his immunity, a plea, detention in a civilian jail. That's the whole U.S. narrative, right? Justice and due process.
Yes, that's their story.
But then we hit this point where the narratives just collide. And this is arguably the most explosive part of the whole saga. We have to bring in the highly dramatic counterclaim from Maduro himself.
Yes, and this is where the story shifts completely from a legal indictment into a potentially world-shaping international incident.
Right.
While U.S. courts see this as a formal prosecution, Maduro's version of events paints a totally opposite picture. He says he was kidnapped.
Kidnapped. I mean, that word implies an illegal violent seizure, completely outside of any legal process. What were the specifics he claimed? Did he say who did it?
According to our source material, Maduro stated the abduction happened during a weekend military raid.
A military raid.
A military raid by foreign elements, right in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. His story is very specific. He wasn't served a warrant. He was forcibly seized. He's repeatedly framed this whole thing not as an arrest, but as an act of war.
An act of espionage against his country.
Exactly.
So let's just hold these two claims up against each other for a second, because they just can't both be true. They're fundamentally irreconcilable. And this is really the crux of the global confusion.
It is.
You have the U.S. legal system describing a formal court appearance, a not guilty plea, a routine remand to custody. And on the other hand, you have the accused describing a violent, clandestine military op-in the heart of Caracas.
And you can't overstate the political significance of that counter-narrative. By claiming he was kidnapped, Maduro achieves several strategic goals.
Like what?
Well, domestically, he rallies support. He presents himself as a victim of foreign aggression, and that deflects attention away from the actual criminal charges.
And internationally?
Internationally, he complicates the whole U.S. legal move. He transforms it, at least in the eyes of many other nations, from an application of justice into an aggressive act that violates state sovereignty.
So it makes it incredibly difficult for the global audience to figure out what's real, given that both narratives are being pushed with such conviction.
Absolutely. When a legal process gets this tangled up with global power dynamics, the narrative that ultimately wins is often the one that supports the strongest action. The U.S. narrative supports the prosecution. Maduro supports condemnation. It's a tool of foreign policy itself.
It really is. Okay, let's transition now from the courtroom drama and the abduction claim and shift our focus to the bigger international picture. Because the official U.S. government response, which our sources capture, takes this from a legal case to a massive public geopolitical declaration.
This is maybe the most provocative piece of information we have, because it explicitly links the judicial action to a clear political goal. After Maduro's plea in New York, a highly charged statement was made by President Trump.
And what exactly did the U.S. president say about the status of Venezuela?
The source states that President Trump asserted quite directly that the U.S. is now in charge of Venezuela.
That is an astonishing statement to make right after a criminal indictment.
It's unbelievable.
You have the formal charges of narco terrorism and weapons, and then immediately a sitting U.S. president declares effective control over that nation. It seems to connect the legal action directly to this huge shift in international power.
It creates a crucial bridge for us to analyze. The criminal indictment basically serves as the pretext for the political claim.
The justification.
Exactly. By successfully framing Maduro as a terrorist and a criminal rather than a legitimate sovereign leader, the U.S. government simultaneously delegitimizes his entire regime. And once you strip away that legitimacy through the legal system, the door opens for the government to make political claims of oversight or control, which is exactly what we see in that statement.
But didn't some diplomatic sources kind of suggest that Trump's declaration, while, yeah, it's highly inflammatory, was maybe more rhetorical posturing? Aimed at a domestic audience or foreign policy hardliners, not an immediate, actionable legal move.
That's a crucial piece of nuance, for sure. And while the statement might not immediately translate to, say, boots on the ground or a UN Security Council resolution, it firmly establishes the U.S. intent. Rhetoric, especially from a president, is a powerful tool in international relations. It signals to allies and opponents that the U.S. no longer respects the Venezuelan government's claim to sovereignty and is actively pursuing regime change using the justice system as its primary leverage.
The source of its moral authority.
Precisely.
So we have a legal strategy to pierce immunity, a detention that reinforces the criminal label, a counter-narrative of military abduction, and a U.S. declaration of control. Given all this, what's the immediate future timeline? When is the next critical step in this process?
The specific date that we have in our sources for Maduro's next major court hearing is March 17th.
March 7th?
That date is the next formal judicial milestone where the prosecution and defense will face off again. They'll likely be dealing with preliminary motions, discovery, maybe setting a trial calendar.
And if we tie all these threads together one last time, the charges, the kidnapping claim, the declaration of U.S. control, why should you, the listener, care about the date of a hearing in a Brooklyn courthouse on March 17th?
Because that hearing and the entire judicial process it represents is the ongoing mechanism that supports the entire geopolitical claim. This whole scenario shows you in real time how legal action, specifically U.S. criminal law, is being wielded and intertwined with international power, with sovereign claims, and with the legitimacy of foreign governments.
So every motion filed on March 17th has bigger implications.
Every single one. It could potentially reinforce the U.S. assertion of authority and further undermine Maduro's standing both at home and abroad. It just shows the incredible power of an indictment to shape foreign policy and, redefine the global pecking order.
It really does. So to tie this all together, we covered the incredibly serious charges filed against a sitting president narco terrorism conspiracy, specifically chosen to bypass immunity. Second, we analyzed that fundamental disagreement over how he even got to court. The claim of a military raid and kidnapping versus the formal plea entered in New York. A strategic battle for legitimacy.
A huge battle.
And third, the immediate geopolitical fallout. The official U.S. declaration that it is now in charge of Venezuela. A direct line drawn between a criminal case and a foreign policy objective.
It's a remarkable study in the weaponization of jurisprudence, really. And for our final provocative thought for you to mull over, what kind of precedent does a case like this set? A sitting president charged with narco terrorism sitting in a foreign jail.
What does it mean for the future?
Exactly. If U.S. courts can successfully claim jurisdiction and strip immunity this way, does this signal the start of a new era? An era where state leaders are increasingly vulnerable to foreign prosecution, fundamentally redefining the very limits of national sovereignty
That's
itself.
it for now. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, stay informed.